For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time for snow, and a time for heat and humidity. A time for colds and flu, and a season for allergies. A time to go skiing, and a time to go to the beach and take walks in the woods. As I mentioned during the announcement time, this sermon was originally written when I was here alone in the church on a cold, snowy day when those snowdrifts were as high as mountains. And it seemed like it might be a good time to laugh. But twice I attempted to preach this sermon and I was unsuccessful. The first Sunday I was supposed to preach it, there had been so much snowfall that a very few of us were able to gather here for worship. And so we did an informal worship service of singing hymns and reading scriptures together. And the second time that I was supposed to preach this sermon, there was so much snow that we actually didn't have a worship service that Sunday morning, which is highly unusual around here. So this is my third attempt, and as I was walking up this morning and I walked by Dane Street Beach and I thought, it's a really beautiful day, this ought to go. Okay, I realized that maybe this third attempt will be successful and I'll actually be able to preach this sermon. Because as Matthew read earlier, there is a time when it's good to laugh. And so this sermon is based on some jokes and some funny stories that were sent to me over email throughout the year. And I hope that as we hear these stories, we can find some good news for our faith within them. And so Jim is going to share the first story.
A grandfather and granddaughter were sitting talking when she asked, "Did God make you, Grandpa?" "Yes, God made me," the grandfather answered. A few minutes later, the little girl asked him, "Did God make me too?" "Yes, God did," the grandfather answered. For a few minutes, the little girl seemed to be studying her grandpa, as well as her own reflection in a small mirror. Her grandfather wondered what was running through her mind. At last she spoke up. "You know, Grandpa," she said, "God's doing a much better job these days."
Don't you just love the confidence that that little girl is showing? It's just priceless. And don't you wish that every child somehow had that confidence that they were just wonderful, talented, unique creations of God? Well, that is a joke, and yet within it is the very good news that as we are created in the image of God, each one of us has been given the gift of creativity. There is just incredible potential within each and every person. Every single one of us is a unique creation of God. During the program year, I have the privilege of teaching the Sunday morning Bible study for adults. And in that class, we like to toss around a lot of ideas, a lot of questions. And so last winter, at some point, we were talking about the creation story in Genesis. And what does it really mean to say that humanity was created in the image of God? We ask questions like, so what characteristics do people share with God? In what ways do humanity actually reflect God? One person actually wondered, is it actually that God is just so vast, so immense, so hard to describe that we use human words to describe God? So we didn't come to any one conclusive answer on a lot of the questions, but in the end, I think every single person in that class agreed that God was involved in the formation, in the molding, in the creation, in the fashioning of humanity, and gave to us all the wonderful gift of creativity. And so within every single person, there is just an amazing amount of potential. We all have incredible potential within us. Now, you might have heard that there is a new football season about to begin. If you haven't heard that, then you haven't been near a radio, a television, a newspaper, or anybody from New England. But when I wrote this sermon, the New England Patriots had just won the Super Bowl. Now that was before there was a lot of discussion about footballs and air pressure, if you can imagine that. But what was so wonderful about the Super Bowl, besides the fact that we won it, was that there were stories of incredible potential that was realized in that game. For example, there was the Seattle Seahawks player named Chris Matthews, who the year before had not been on a football field at all. Instead, he had been working as a store clerk in a Foot Locker. But somehow that day, he was on the field for the Seattle Seahawks. Having never been the target of a quarterback before, he caught 4 passes for 109 yards and scored a touchdown. That's realizing some new potential in his life. And yet, of course, as New England Patriots fans, the story we like best is the one of 24-year-old Malcolm Butler, who at the very end of the game was able to intercept the Seattle Seahawks, assuring a Patriots win. Now, Malcolm Butler had not been an outstanding football player. He had not been a draft pick of the Patriots. He had to do a walk-on camp and just hope that he would be noticed by the coaches. And on that Super Bowl Sunday, it was not really expected that he would be on the field. He was not a starter by any means. And yet at the very last seconds, he was on the field. He read the play correctly. He intercepted that pass, and the Patriots won. In interviews after that game, Butler talked about how often Coach Belichick had gone over that play with him, trying to get him to recognize that pass play so that if it happened in the game, he would be able to do something about the play, intercept it, somehow break up the play. And he kept missing it in practice. But on that day in the Super Bowl, he recognized the play, he intercepted, and we won. He found that incredible potential within himself. Now, granted, probably none of us are ever going to really reach our potential on a football field. Maybe some of the younger ones are. Matt would like to do that on the soccer field. But all of us have been gifted by God with the gift of creativity, with the gift of astounding potential. That is really good news for all of us. And so now our second story.
On the crowded ark, Noah posted the following instructions. Alligators, stop nibbling the fellow passengers. Flies, quit pestering the horses. Pigeons, the lions are not statues. Mosquitoes and bats, quit biting the other passengers. Cows, fly swatting is prohibited. Lightning bugs, remember lights out at 9 p.m. Pigs, clean up your room. Raccoons, stop your midnight raids. Hyenas, stop laughing at the other passengers. Lions, quit stalking everyone, you're making them nervous. Ants, bring your own picnic next time. Hoofed animals, please tiptoe after midnight. Camels, no spitting at the other passengers. Squirrels, quit hiding nuts in the bathtub drains. Turtles, your dinners are getting cold and starting from the dining hall earlier would help. All passengers, be careful what you say around the parrots if you don't want it repeated.
So that's a pretty good story from Noah's Ark. And it is a funny story, but there is a really good lesson in that. And that is that when you're in community, that involves some compromise, some give and take. And the good news for us is that life in a faith community is truly richer, fuller, more meaningful. When we choose to be part of a faith community, our life of faith, despite the compromises, despite the give and take, our life is just that much more rich. Because together in community, we can ask each other questions, we can challenge each other, we can talk to each other about our faith. Together in community, we can care for each other. Together in community, we can try to discern God's voice about how to reach out to this hurting and broken world of ours. Together in community, we can worship God. Together in community, we can thank God for the blessings in our lives. Despite the compromises, despite the quirks, despite the crazy personalities that we all have, life is so much richer when we choose to be part of a faith community. From the very beginning, followers of Jesus Christ understood that there was great value in coming together and being part of a community. Even Jesus himself, as he began his ministry, what did he do? He reached out to disciples to help him do his work. And then this past year, we as a church studied the book of Acts. And what is that book about? But the earliest believers banding together to learn more about their faith, to support each other, and to care about one another. From the very beginning, people have understood that life of faith is richer when it's lived in community, despite the give and take that might be involved, despite the compromises. Back in June of 2008, archaeologists in Rehab, Jordan, reported that they believed that they had just excavated the earliest Christian church ever to be unearthed. And they dated that church back to 33 to 70 of the first century. Now, those archaeologists had actually been working on excavating a 3rd century church called St. George's. But as they were doing that work and they were walking, they heard a hollow sound beneath their feet. And so digging down just a couple of more feet, they found an air shaft that opened up to a large subterranean compartment. And in that compartment was a cave that had a number of small rooms in it, and there was also a tunnel that led to a cistern. So there was air, there was water, and there were rooms. And they assumed that most of the rooms were living quarters, but there was one room that was different. It had what looked like an altar in the middle with some large stones surrounding it, probably serving as seats, and there were some iron crosses found in that particular small room as well. And so the archaeologists believed that they had found a place where some early Christians had lived together underground, and that they also had a church, a chapel, as part of their living quarters. They assumed probably that it was Christians who had been fleeing Roman persecution in Jerusalem, and they'd come to Jordan to live. Now, can you imagine the Noah's Ark rules they would have needed if a group of people were living underground for a long time? Now, in the interest of full disclosure, there are some other archaeologists who have since doubted whether or not that church can actually be dated to 1st century. It might be 2nd century. And yet all biblical and archaeological evidence and the stories we know point to the fact that from the very beginning, followers of Jesus Christ have understood that there is something really fulfilling, really rich, being in community with others. During my sabbatical leave, one of the things that we had the opportunity to do was visit other churches. I don't get to do that very often on Sunday mornings. I'm usually pretty busy here. But my family and I visited a number of churches. And the first thing that I would like to say about that is that we spend a lot of time worrying about the decline of religious life in America. And it's true, it is declining. But I want to assure you that all around, there are people coming together on Sunday mornings to worship and to be together in community. And they're doing it in a lot of different ways. And that was a wonderful lesson to be reminded of. It was very inspiring. And yet at the same time, my family and I started to get tired of those visits. We were always welcomed warmly when we walked in the door. And I always assured the people welcoming us that I was a minister on sabbatical so they wouldn't feel bad when I didn't show up the next week. But after a while, it got tiring always being a visitor, always being on the outside. I wanted to be where people know me and where I know people. You know that TV sitcom Cheers where everybody knows your name. There's something really rich, really wonderful about being together in community where we can ask our questions, share our worries, do our work together. That's a good news message from that Noah's Ark story. And finally,
4 brothers left home for college, and they became successful doctors and lawyers and prospered. Some years later, they chatted after having dinner together. They discussed the gifts they were able to give to their elderly mother who lived far away in another city. The first said, "I had a big house built for Mama." The second said, "I had a $100,000 theater built in the house." The third said, "I had my Mercedes dealer deliver an SL600 to her." The fourth said, "You know how Mama loved reading the Bible, and you know she can't read anymore because she can't see very well? I met this preacher who told me about a parrot that could recite the entire Bible. It took 20 years and 12 preachers to teach him. I had to pledge to contribute $100,000 a year for 20 years to the church, but it was worth it. Mama just has to name the chapter and verse, and the parrot will recite it." The other brothers were impressed. After the holidays, Mom sent out her thank you notes. She wrote, "Milton, the house you built is huge. I live in only one room, but I have to clean the whole house. Thanks anyway." Marvin, "I am too old to travel. I stay home. I have my groceries delivered, so I never use the Mercedes. The thought was good. Thanks." Michael, "You gave me an expensive theater with Dolby sound. It could hold 50 people, but most of my friends are no longer living. I've lost my hearing, and I'm nearly blind. I'll never use it. Thank you for the gesture just the same." Dearest Melvin, you were the only son to have the good sense to give a little thought to your gift. The chicken was delicious. Thank you.
so there's a few morals to that story. One being that maybe it's important to be sure the person you're giving a gift to understands what they're actually receiving so they don't eat your chicken or your parrot. And we have to say that son was really trying hard to give his mother what she wanted, you know, the ability to hear the scriptures, and yet she was clearly far more practical and was just hungry. But perhaps the best moral of the story is that what's really important when we're giving gifts is not how much it costs, but that we look at the person to whom we are giving a gift, recognize the need within them, and respond to that need. That's good news for us because we can do that. We can look at people, see what they need, and respond to that need. That is one of the most incredible things, I think, about Jesus Christ, is that throughout his life and ministry, even if he just met somebody, he was able to look at them, see deep within them what they most needed, and respond to that need. So one day he was on a hillside and there were parents and little children coming to him because they wanted to be blessed, and the disciples thought, he's too busy, he doesn't need to deal with them. Think about the fragility of life in that day and age. And so Jesus took time to be with children, with infants whose lives were so fragile, and he took them in his arms and he blessed them. One day he'd been by the Sea of Galilee for a really long time preaching and teaching, and it got late and people got hungry. And somehow he managed to respond to that need and he fed them. Jesus is able to look at the need and respond to it, and as followers of Jesus Christ, that is part of our calling. To look at the person sitting next to you, to look at your neighbors, to look at your fellow church members, to look at the people far away. How about those folks fleeing Syria and Iraq right now? And to look at that need and determine how best we can respond to that. We do strive to do that. We feed people, we clothe people, we house people, we dry their tears. The work can feel overwhelming. And yet, as followers of Jesus Christ, there's no choice but to continue to look at the need and to respond in the ways that we know that we can. So there was a night towards the end of Jesus' life, he knew his arrest was imminent. And he was sitting at a table, a Passover meal with his disciples. and he saw in them a need. They had to be fearful about what was happening. They had to be uncertain about what life was going to be like once he was gone. And so he broke bread. He shared a cup with them as a way of assuring him that he would continue to be present in their lives. Jesus saw a need and he responded to it, and he responds to our same need. That each time we gather around this table, we are assured of the guidance, of the comfort, of the leading of Jesus Christ. So we're invited to gather here at this table now. Amen.